I should have been thrilled. A month-long stay in a grand Victorian house, nestled deep within a fog-shrouded forest, where the air smelled of pine and damp earth. The path leading to the estate was narrow and winding, vanishing into the thick mist that clung to the trees. No neighbors, no distractions. Just me, my work, and the promise of complete solitude. The listing promised historical charm, with seclusion at its finest. That much, at least, was true. The property was vast, overgrown with tangled ivy and creeping moss. The front lawn lay in disrepair, with dry, crumbling flowers in beds that had been left unattended for years. Their withered petals crunched underfoot, brittle remnants of a forgotten garden. Rusting iron gates marked the entrance, swinging open with a prolonged screech as I arrived, as though the house had been waiting. The house itself loomed, 3 stories tall, with dark wood siding, weathered by time and rain. Stained glass windows peered out from the upper floors, shimmering in the dim light like watchful eyes. The roofline was jagged, its edges obscured by creeping fog. An old stone fountain, cracked and dry, stood in front of the porch, its basin littered with fallen leaves and brittle twigs. As I stepped onto the porch, the floorboards groaned under my weight, a deep, dragging sound that echoed unnaturally. The air was thick, carrying the scent of aged timber and decay. The front door was heavy, more so than I expected, as though the house itself reluctantly allowed me entry. Inside, the house was breathtaking, in a way that stole the breath from your lungs and replaced it with unease. Ornate moldings traced intricate patterns along the high ceilings where cobwebs hung like tattered curtains. A grand chandelier, dim with age, loomed above the main hall, its crystal pendants dulled by dust. Massive bookshelves filled with dusty tomes lined the walls, titles long forgotten, the leather bindings cracked and fragile. The floors were made of thick oak planks, their dark grain marred with deep scratches. The walls, thicker than any modern home, seemed to absorb sound, cloaking the house in an unnatural stillness. I would later discover why they were built this way. Each floor revealed more secrets. The first floor held a formal dining room, where a long mahogany table lay bare, save for a single withered rose resting in its center. The second floor featured a gallery, its walls adorned with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me as I passed. The third floor ended in a narrow hallway, leading to a locked attic door with a keyhole choked by dust. The basement door, too, remained firmly locked, its brass handle cold to the touch, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something on the other side was listening. The windows on every floor were deep set, framed by heavy velvet curtains that muffled the sounds of the forest. The air inside was cool and still, with no hint of wind despite the towering trees outside. In the kitchen, a large fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by a stone hearth worn smooth from use. A collection of copper pots hung above a butcher's block, untouched but polished, as though awaiting a cook who had long since departed. I wandered the reading room, admiring the stained glass windows that filtered the light into muted reds and golds, giving the room an almost otherworldly glow. The furniture was elegant but worn, velvet chairs faded, and mahogany tables scarred with scratches whose origins I didn't want to consider. The property's rear held an overgrown garden, obscured by a low-lying mist. Hidden among the tangled weeds, I discovered a family cemetery, its headstones tilted and worn, names barely legible. The forest stretched out beyond the cemetery, thick and silent. The trees grew close together, twisting and gnarled, their bare branches scraping against one another like whispering voices. There was no Wi-Fi, as expected, no cell service either. I had come prepared. Boxes of books, journals, and a typewriter I barely used. I lit a fire in the parlor, its glow casting long shadows that flickered against the walls. The crackling wood and soft ticking of an ancient grandfather clock were the only sounds. For the first day, I reveled in the silence, the kind of deep quiet that wraps around you. Comforting yet oppressive, the sunset came early, swallowed by the fog rolling in from the forest. I walked through the house once more, the wooden stairs creaking beneath my feet, each room more silent than the last. The third-floor corridor stretched out longer than I remembered, the locked attic door waiting at the end like a question unanswered. I spent that evening reading by candlelight, the soft glow illuminating pages filled with forgotten stories. The thick walls seemed to embrace me, insulating me from the outside world. I felt safe, comforted even. For now, everything was perfect. That was before the house started making noise. I woke up to a whisper. It was soft, like a breath against my ear, but when I sat up, there was nothing, just the shadows stretching along the wooden walls, long, dark, and still. I brushed it off as a dream, forcing a smile. The silence of the house was deep, and I told myself that I just wasn't used to it yet. But I couldn't shake the unease. The day started quietly. I decided to explore more of the house. The basement door remained locked, its brass handle still cold to the touch. Probably for the best, I thought. Old houses had dangerous stairwells. It wasn't until the evening that I noticed something off. While making tea in the kitchen, I caught movement in the reflection of the window. A figure drifting across the hallway behind me. I spun around. Nothing. My heart hammered, a loud, steady pounding in my ears. I checked every room. The parlor, the reading room, the dining hall. Empty. My curiosity turned into obsession. I climbed the stairs to the third floor. And then, I stopped cold. The attic door, once locked, now stood ajar. The air grew colder, I had to know. I pushed the door open. The hinges let out a drawn-out screech that echoed like a scream. The attic was a world unto itself. Dust motes danced in the dim light. Antique dolls lined shelves, their eyes black, glassy, and judging. Tiny furniture, cribs, chairs, tables, all coated in a thick layer of dust. The dolls were the worst. Their faces, cracked porcelain, lips faded, eyes hollow, looked like they had seen too much. One doll sat apart from the rest, tilted head, hands outstretched. Beneath it, a rusted old key, covered in dust and grime. My fingers trembled as I picked it up, and then I saw it. A small door, barely big enough for a child, hidden in the wall, a wall that should have been solid. I froze. The walls were hollow. But why? I tried the key on the small door. It didn't fit. A new thought struck me. The basement. I descended the stairs, each step heavier than the last. The house seemed to hold its breath. The basement door now waited for me, cold, unyielding. I inserted the key. It turned. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, revealing pure darkness below. I peered into the void, the stale air brushing past me. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the basement. The air grew colder, thicker, like it had been trapped for years, waiting. Each step felt like sinking into darkness. I reached the bottom, feeling along the damp walls. My fingertips brushed something cold, metallic, a switch. With a click, a single bulb flickered overhead. Dim light bathed the room, casting long shadows that danced along the crumbling stone walls. The bulb buzzed, as if struggling to stay alive. The basement was vast, filled with old furniture, all covered in once white, dusty sheets. Tables with broken legs, chairs with torn upholstery, wardrobes towering like silhouettes of ghosts. Everything lay under a thick blanket of dust, as though it hadn't been touched in decades. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with strange items. Ceramic figurines, clocks frozen at midnight, tarnished mirrors reflecting dull, broken images. The air carried a faint smell of rot, wood, and something sweet, like decaying flowers. I moved slowly, my footsteps stirring up clouds of dust. Then, a crash. A ceramic vase fell from a shelf, shattering at my feet. I froze. The silence that followed felt heavy, intentional. It was like the house was pointing at something. My eyes shifted. There, behind the shelf, I saw it. A small door. It shouldn't be there. The wall should have been solid, but it wasn't. I gripped the shelf with trembling hands, heaving it aside. Dust poured from the motion, filling the air with a choking cloud. The door was small, unlocked, but boarded up with old, crumbling wooden planks. The planks snapped easily in my hands, fragile as ash. I paused. The smell that hit me was overwhelming. Earth, dampness, something rotten. It creeped into my lungs, thick and heavy. I should have stopped. I should have closed the door, but I didn't. I stepped through. The passage descended into darkness, a narrow corridor barely wide enough for me to walk. The walls closed in, rough stone grazing my shoulders. My heart pounded in my chest. The silence was complete, except for the sound of my breathing. The light from the basement barely reached into the tunnel. I turned, looking back. The doorway seemed smaller, farther away. Then, a sound. A whisper. Soft, familiar. Come closer. I froze. My blood ran cold, but I kept going. The passage opened up into a small chamber. The air was thick with the scent of earth and something else. Death. In the dim light, I could make out old toys scattered on the ground. A broken mirror, its surface cracked into web-like patterns. Faded cloth piled in a corner, too large for a blanket, too small for a rug. I stepped closer. The fabric shifted, not from the wind, but as if something underneath had moved. I stumbled back, gasping. The house seemed to breathe. A low rumble echoed from within the walls, and I knew I was no longer alone. The chamber was silent, but the air felt alive. I hadn't noticed it at first, but there she was, a figure, pale and luminous, standing in the corner. A woman's ghost, her face faint, eyes hollow, staring at me. She raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, pointing at the wall. My gut twisted as I followed her silent command. There, at the bottom of the wall, a crack, barely visible, just enough to see the wall wasn't solid. I crouched, running my fingers along the ragged line. Stone gave way to loose earth. I searched the walls and found it, a switch hidden behind a rusted pipe. With a click, lights flickered to life. Yellow bulbs cast a dim glow across the room, and that's when I saw it, a shovel, leaning against the wall. I knew what I had to do. The earth was cold and heavy, fighting me with each shovel of dirt. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. After what felt like hours, the shovel hit something hard. A suitcase, large, leather. Rusted metal buckles held it closed. My hands trembled as I undid the latches. The lid creaked open, and then the smell hit me. Earth, mold, decay, bones, human remains, curled into a fetal position. The skull cracked, a web of fractures running from forehead to base. Hair, fragments still clinging, faded and frayed, blended with the soil. A dress, tattered, faded pink, stained by dark marks that had once been red. Rings on bony fingers, tarnished silver, their gems missing. The bones were brittle, yellowed, aged by time. Some collapsed into dust at the slightest touch. I staggered back, gasping for air. The ghost still stood there, her hand now lowered, her eyes watching me. No anger, only silence. And then I saw them. Small doors along the walls, like drawers in a morgue, except these had been hidden with concrete, now cracked and crumbling with age. Heart racing, I approached one. My fingers found the handle. It gave way with a groan. I pulled. Another body, a skeleton shrunken and fragile, arms bound with disintegrating ropes, the fibers barely holding, a jawbone hanging loose, teeth yellowed, the skull tilted at a haunting angle, the eye sockets, hollow, empty, staring, but only with the echo of what had once been eyes. Cloth, bundled in the mouth, now stiff and blackened by time. I stumbled back, hands shaking. It was clear now. I had found a serial killer's graveyard. Then, I saw it. A notebook, leather-bound, its cover slick with dust and age. I picked it up. The pages, yellowed, stained, fingerprinted. Handwriting, elegant, controlled. Subject 1, resistant, required multiple restraints. Subject 3, bones fragile. Duration, 5 days. They all break eventually. My stomach turned. Experiments. Horrors done in secret. The ghost watched me. Waiting. I closed the notebook. My decision was clear. It was time to call the police. The air felt heavier than ever as I stared at the notebook. I had to leave. No car, no service. The house had trapped me, but I wasn't going to stay. I grabbed my bag, my phone, and the notebook. With one last look at the ghost, silently staring, I stepped into the cold night air. The woods were dense, the fog curling around the trees, hiding the path ahead. Each step was heavy, dread following close behind. The village had to be miles away, but I walked. Hours passed. The lights of the village finally came into view, and with it, cell reception. My fingers shook as I dialed, ringing. 911, what's your emergency? I found bodies, a lot of them. Please, send help. The police arrived, a convoy of cars, flashing lights breaking the dawn mist. I led them through the twisting path back to that house. Silent now, as if it had never held secrets. The authorities searched every room, every wall. Then the discoveries came. 50 bodies, 50 lives, hidden in the walls, the basement, the ground surrounding the house. The news spread fast. Serial killer's mass grave found. 50 victims unearthed after decades. The truth? The house's owner, Elijah Graves, a respected doctor. His experiments were hidden behind locked doors. His wife, the ghost I saw, had discovered his terrible secret. But she wasn't the first. She had been his last, the final witness who knew too much. He ended her life to hide what he had done. But the house remembered. The notebook explained it all. She wanted to leave. I couldn't let her. The walls remember. They hold what I have done. 50 stories, 50 failures. She stays with them. The police unearthed every remains. The house watched in silence. The ghost didn't appear again. She had been freed. But the other voices, they remained. I left the town. I never looked back. But sometimes, at night, I hear it, the soft whisper. Thank you. And then, the creaking of floorboards, the sound of footsteps, coming from the walls. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Click the bell icon so you never miss any new content. Stay tuned for more creepy stories coming soon. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the dark, subscribe for more. Because the best horror isn't what you hear, It's what follows when the story is over.